Miguel Rodriguez's tactical boots made no sound on the Willowbrook Estate's sidewalk as he approached Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. 6 months of reconnaissance training had taught him to observe before acting, and what he observed made his jaw clench with controlled fury. Karen stood at her front door, still clutching her violation clipboard, explaining to Officer Janet Mills why her citizen's arrest of Emma for continued noise infractions was perfectly justified under HOA authority. "Ma'am, you can't actually arrest a 5-year-old, Officer Mills said wearily. This was her third Karen call this month. "I absolutely can detain violators until proper authorities." Karen's voice died as she noticed the man approaching her driveway. Tall, lean, with the kind of quiet intensity that made her suddenly aware of every sound her mouth was making. "Karen Whitmore." Miguel's voice carried the calm precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. "Mr. Rodriguez, I presume. About time. Your daughter's behavior today was completely—" "Ma'am," Miguel interrupted, his tone respectful, but carrying an edge that made Officer Mills step back instinctively. "I understand you buried my daughter in sand for 43 minutes. Temporarily contained," Karen corrected, consulting her clipboard. "And it was 47 minutes. I keep precise records." Miguel nodded slowly, processing this information with the same methodical approach he used to plan extraction missions. "I see. And one authority gave you permission to bury a 5-year-old child?" "HOA regulations clearly state." "Ma'am, I've read every document you've sent my wife. Twice." Miguel's smile was polite and absolutely terrifying. "I don't recall any burial protocols." Karen's confidence wavered for the first time in 3 years of HOA presidency. Something about Miguel's posture, the way he stood perfectly still while speaking, made her acutely aware that she was dealing with someone far outside her usual suburban sphere of influence. "Your daughter violated quiet hours," she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its authoritative edge. Section 12.4 clearly states. Section 12.4 addresses noise complaints through written warnings, mediation, and fines. Miguel recited from memory. "Not burial. I checked." Officer Mills cleared her throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to come with me to discuss today's incident. This is harassment." Karen protested, but her usual commanding presence was cracking. "I was enforcing community standards. Ask anyone. They'll tell you that little girl needed discipline." "Actually," Miguel said quietly, "I did ask around. Turns out, several neighbors have some interesting stories about your enforcement methods. Mrs. Henderson mentioned something about you confiscating her garden hose for unauthorized water usage. Mr. Bradley said you fined him for his dog barking at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday." Karen's clipboard trembled slightly. These were legitimate violations, documented according to protocol. "Community standards must be maintained," she repeated, but it sounded hollow now. Miguel stepped closer, still maintaining perfect respectful distance, but his presence somehow filled the entire space between them. "Ma'am, I've spent 6 months dealing with actual threats to actual safety. Coming home to find out someone buried my daughter for building sandcastles too loudly. Well, that's a different kind of problem entirely." The neighborhood had gone quiet around them. Curtains twitched in windows. Even the birds seemed to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Are you threatening me?" Karen demanded. "No, ma'am," Miguel replied with that same terrifying politeness. "I'm just letting you know that things are going to change around here." 3 weeks later, Karen's reign of HOA terror had transformed into something resembling actual community management. Though she fought every reasonable decision with the desperation of someone watching their empire crumble. The emergency HOA meeting had drawn the largest crowd in Willowbrook Estate's history. Miguel hadn't said a word during the proceedings, but his presence in the back row had been enough to embolden neighbors who'd spent years cowering under Karen's clipboard tyranny. "Motion to remove sandbox burial from acceptable enforcement procedures," announced Mrs. Henderson, trying not to smile. "Seconded," came a chorus of voices. "This is absurd." Karen protested from her position at the head table, though she noticed her usual supporters had mysteriously found urgent reasons to skip tonight's meeting. "We need strong leadership, not mob rule." Like burying children? Asked Tom Bradley innocently. Karen's face flushed crimson. That was a measured response to a legitimate violation. What truly unnerved her wasn't the rebellion. She'd weathered those before. It was Miguel Rodriguez's systematic approach to community involvement. He'd read every HOA document, attended every meeting, and somehow managed to turn her own regulations against her through perfectly polite, absolutely devastating questions. Mrs. Whitmore, Miguel had asked during last week's session, could you clarify the legal authority behind confiscating garden hoses? I'm having trouble finding that particular enforcement power in our state HOA statutes. Karen had stammered through increasingly weak justifications while Miguel took careful notes, never raising his voice, never showing disrespect, but somehow making every one of her arbitrary rules sound exactly as ridiculous as they actually were. Tonight's meeting was her last stand. I moved to restructure HOA enforcement protocols, Miguel announced from the back row, his first words of the evening. Seconded, said practically everyone. This is a coup, Karen declared, but her clipboard was shaking now. You can't just change everything because one new resident doesn't like community standards. Actually, Miguel replied, standing slowly, I love community standards, real ones. The kind that make neighborhoods better instead of terrorizing 5-year-olds for playing too loudly. The vote wasn't even close. Karen's emergency powers were revoked, her enforcement protocols dismantled, and her beloved violation quotas eliminated entirely. As neighbors filed out, chattering excitedly about their liberation, Karen found herself alone with Miguel in the community center. This isn't over, she said quietly. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. You're right, it's not. Something in his tone made Karen look out sharply. He wasn't gloating or threatening. He was planning. You buried my daughter, Mrs. Whitmore. And while I'm committed to handling this through proper channels, I want you to understand something. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Seals don't quit. Ever. We finish what we start. Karen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What exactly are you planning, she asked. Miguel smiled, the same polite, terrifying expression she'd seen on her lawn 3 weeks ago. Community improvement, ma'am. Just like you always wanted. As he walked away, Karen realized that her war with Miguel Rodriguez had only just begun. And for the first time in her HOA career, she was the one who didn't know the rules of engagement. Karen Whitmore stood triumphantly over the freshly filled sandbox, her manicured hands dusting off imaginary dirt, as 5-year-old Emma Rodriguez's muffled sobs echoed from beneath 3 feet of sand. The HOA president had finally found the perfect solution to the playground noise violation that had been plaguing Willowbrook Estates for exactly 47 minutes. There, Karen announced to the gathering crowd of horrified neighbors. Problem solved. No more screaming, no more running, no more. Karen. Mrs. Henderson shrieked from across the pristine lawn. You buried a child. Temporarily contained, Karen corrected, adjusting her HOA president badge that caught the afternoon sun like a shield of suburban authority. Section 12.4 of our community guidelines clearly states that excessive noise disturbances must be addressed immediately. I'm simply enforcing community standards. The sandbox, Emma's beloved castle-building sanctuary, had become an impromptu burial site after Karen witnessed the girls' egregious violation of the 2 p.m. quiet hour. Emma had been constructing an elaborate sand fortress, complete with sound effects that included dragon roars and princess proclamations that exceeded the community's established 35 decibel limit. She's 5 years old, gasped Tom Bradley, frantically digging with his bare hands alongside 3 other neighbors. Age is not an exemption from community regulations, Karen replied, consulting her laminated HOA handbook. Besides, children learn best through natural consequences. This is educational. As Emma's rescue commenced, Karen's phone buzzed with 17 text messages, 14 missed calls, and a flood of Facebook notifications from the Willowbrook Watchdogs group. Her actions had been live-streamed by Mrs. Chen, who'd been documenting what she initially thought would be another routine Karen complaint session. "Karen, her father's coming home today," Mrs. Henderson warned, helping to lift a sobbing but physically unharmed Emma from her sandy prison. "You might want to reconsider your educational methods. Every parent thinks their child is special," Karen scoffed, making notes in her violation log. "Mr. Rodriguez can schedule an appointment like everyone else. I have community standards to maintain." What Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez had spent the last 6 months in classified operations that would make her sandbox burial look like a neighborhood pillow fight. His convoy was already pulling into the subdivision, 30 minutes ahead of schedule, and the man who'd earned his Navy SEAL trident through Hell Week had just received a very interesting phone call from his next-door neighbor. Emma ran toward her house, sandy pigtails streaming behind her, clutching the plastic shovel that had become her accidental weapon of Karen's downfall. She had no idea that her daddy's special job was about to become very relevant to their quiet suburban life. Karen watched the chaos with satisfaction, unaware that her perfectly ordered world was about to encounter a force that specialized in precision, persistence, and never, ever quitting.